Welcome to the Stress Detox Podcast. I am your host, Edie Gooditis. Thank you for being here. I support female leaders with stress and embodiment coaching. I lead retreats and programs and classes for yoga, breathwork, and meditation. I facilitate at workplace wellness events for organizations, and I am a best-selling author. And today I have my beautiful friend, Jeanne Foot, joining us to speak all things addictions, trauma, and how they relate to stress. So welcome, Jeanne.
Thank you so much for having me, Edie. It's a pleasure to be here.
Thank you. And so just to share with our listeners, Jeanne is a certified addiction and recovery specialist with a trauma-informed approach to mental health and substance misuse and addiction. She is the founder of the Recovery Concierge, a boutique with a suite of services designed to help those struggling with the impact of substance. Her approach is compassionate, family-centered, trauma-informed, and holistic, building up recovery capital in all areas of life so her clients thrive in recovery. She's trained in Somatic Relational Therapy, Compassionate Inquiry, and is a certified international addiction counselor and recovery coach. Jeanne has been featured on the Naked Mind podcast and the SHAIR Podcast and published in the Canadian Mental Health Journal on behalf of her contribution for work with the Family Navigation Project at Sunnybrook Hospital. So welcome. Thank you again for being here.
Absolute pleasure. So thank you.
Yes. So just to dive in, I'd love us to start off the call with what is something you're currently celebrating?
Believe it or not, I'm celebrating me. It's taken me a long time because you know my age. For those who don't, I'm pretty transparent. 65 young. Yeah. And I have really, for the most part of my life, lived everybody else's life, not my own. So without a doubt, and I've celebrated a new day and the freedom that we have in this country so far.
I love that. That's a beautiful thing to celebrate. So thank you for sharing that.
Thank you.
Yeah. And I think a lot of our listeners can relate as well because it's so common that we don't necessarily celebrate ourselves. We look externally a lot. So having that grace to start to turn the gaze within and really use our voice to share that we are celebrating ourselves is beautiful. So thank you. And what is a quote or a mantra that you'd like to share or that you live by?
Funny enough, I do live by a lot of mantras and affirmations, but I think one of them, I just used it this afternoon, so it's front and center, and I just said, you really can't take anyone further than you've taken yourself. So it doesn't mean you have to have the exact replica experience, but you have to be willing to look at yourself and be honest and really look at your demons, for want of a better word. And they're not always demons, but your dark, your shadow sides, and really understand who you are and what motivates you and how you, like, what drives you. And then when you know that, everything else can change.
Yeah.
So you really can't take anybody further than you've gone yourself or taken yourself.
I love that. That's so true. And I think it's so essential with the work that you share with the world and with the space of stress management. Like we have to be able to understand so much of like the journey to be able to guide others through and beyond it. So it's really beautiful that you acknowledge that and that you're working in this space. Like it just takes so much awareness and experience and courage. So I'm really excited for this conversation.
Thank you. But, in a journey, like most people, they take a journey because they want something different in their life. The last thing they want to do is look at their dark night of the soul. Like really, people, who wants to sign up for that, especially if it's going to be painful. So I think that people don't recognize where they're heading, but that is part of the process. And sometimes you're giving yourself permission to live the life that you want unbridledly. That's powerful.
It's super powerful. And it's amazing that they have the support from you to help them guide and move through that dark night experience. Because that's when it's easy to be like, never mind, and just jump back and stop the work. So it's amazing then to guide everyone through to the full transformation so they experience what's possible on the other side?
Well, the idea is, you know, people think drugs and alcohol are the problem. We're just use them for example, but they're never. They're people's solution to underlying pain and underlying unresolved trauma, right? And people don't understand that. So when they get into it, but that is the work. Like, you know, after the drugs and alcohol are gone, you're looking for emotional sobriety, that you have freedom, you have peace, you have joy. There's no craving, no constriction, no stigma, no shame. Like, those things do exist in mental health today, unfortunately. But there's also another opportunity for you. And so that's what I've learned from experience, with a great share of grit and tenacity, may I add. It doesn't come easy, you know, it's for the faint-hearted, there's no question, but the reward is beyond what you can imagine.
Yeah. Yeah, I totally hear that. I totally hear that. Well, without any further then, I'd love if you're comfortable to share what led you into addictions and mental health and trauma support. And you can
So in terms of my vocation, how I got here and for my own recovery, I'll tell you, it's very simple. My family was rampant with mental health issues, and there was trauma and abuse, domestic abuse in the home, and substance abuse and all the things. But the truth is that it was through my own personal journey that I not only did the work for myself personally to heal, but I became a professional in it, because there's a lot that's not working properly.
Right.
And it's only through sheer luck and grit. I have a tenacious spirit, and that's what really got me here, to be honest with you. Because I don't know why I worked so hard at something that felt difficult at times, but I guess I had a vision of what could be for everybody. Right. And so there's always that component of it. But I was just about to say what the other component was, and just lost my train of thought for a second. No, so go ahead. We'll come back to it.
Yeah, well, it's so true. Like it really does require having that bigger knowing and trust of what is possible. Because when we're in it and when we're in what can feel comfortable, and when things do get hard, it's easy to then slip back to what is comfortable, even if it's unhealthy, because we don't want to keep going into that next zone. So it definitely takes grit and tenacity. I hear you on that one. And that's probably why, like, you're still in this work and expanding even further and advocating even harder now, because
yeah,
like
it's a restless soul. I think that's what it is, because no, but in all fairness, like, there is some really difficult and painful parts of this work, but there's some beautiful joys, and they balance out, which is why I do it.
Yeah.
And there's something needs to change. There's a lot that needs to change in terms of how we treat mental health, how we heal from it. And this applies to addiction and trauma as well. And there's some old models of care that really are, we're not going to debate whether they're good or bad, but that they're just, the outcomes are so mediocre or poor.
Right.
So, like, why are we defending something that doesn't really work? It doesn't make sense to me.
Yeah.
Especially if we had other options.
Yeah.
And that was my own personal experience. That's what happened. I went into sobriety in 1993, and I thought I was completely broken, flawed, had to go to treatment, came from a messed up family, and all the things. And then coming out, like, what you recognize, it's so much more than about that. They didn't have a solution for me. I had to create my own solution, because I was abstinent from substance, but frozen in my body,
right,
fearful as hell, anxiety, not medicated, not diagnosed. Not that I really needed a diagnosis, but nobody really could help me, because externally I looked like I was functioning, but inside I was dying.
Right.
And so that was my catalyst for this journey, because I had gone as far as I could on my adaptations to get me this far.
Right.
There was no way but to move differently.
Yeah. Yeah, it's tricky. I appreciate you sharing part of your story and how you got into this work. I think it's really valuable for others to hear. So thank you. So I'd love us to jump to our next question. How do addictions, trauma, stress, and grief influence one another?
They do. So there's not only a psychological aspect of how everything relates, there's a physiological aspect of how everything relates and a biological aspect. So what happens is people may work on one plane more than the other, maybe a mental plane more than a physical plane. Like you're a body specialist, I'm a head expert. For me, being in my body is more of a newer way, where maybe the mental work could be different for you. You know what I'm saying? So I think that how I got it. Sorry, what was the question you asked me about how I got into it?
No. So how do addiction, stress, trauma, and grief
relate
influence one another?
They're just, listen, stress, if you have to look at what's a precursor to anybody being triggered, whether it's to drugs, alcohol, an impulsive behavior, a person gambling money, sex, work, whatever, scrolling, then it doesn't take much. If the attention is going there, it's not going anywhere else. So what happens is when someone does that enough time and they're not conscious of what they're actually doing, because they're not in this present moment, they're somewhere else, their subconscious is running it, then basically all you're going to get same really dysfunctional patterns, and that will trigger a stress response. It can trigger cortisol, it can trigger freeze mode, shutdown. Like there's so many different ways it could exhibit to someone emotionally, rage, anger, crying, laughing. Like just what it is basically a dysregulation of the body. It's a dysregulation of the nervous system, and the body starts to speak, and it goes in and it can look in many different ways, and there's no right or wrong. Everything's welcomed. That's the whole thing about somatics, is that all of it is welcomed. So once that happens, the person is very vulnerable to relapse. And relapse or reoccurrence of a situation is not just about actually using it. There's an emotional precursor that always comes before a relapse or a reoccurrence or setback of any kind. Whether it's intentional or not, it's irrelevant, but there's always something emotionally that happens that sets that off. So most people today, I would imagine, and I don't want to just target North America, but that's where we are pretty dysregulated, right? Like it's an instant bypass, hit the buzzer bypass, and we're somewhere else in whatever way you want to look at it. And that's what's happening today. And so we're not present. We may be present in statue, but not in connection.
Yeah, that's something I notice in my work extensively, as well as in my own journey of moving into this space of supporting clients and stress and grief and mindfulness. It's definitely, I had a lot of patterns with addictions in my past, and I'm still working through other ones, because it's like once you remove one, it's natural to find another to fill it. So it's really like the core question of like, well, what is it we're looking to fill? Like, what is that void? What is that conversation?
You can never fill it. It's inside out. And everybody tries to go the other way.
Exactly. And so it's like really getting into the nitty gritty of like, what am I avoiding? What am I numbing? What am I outsourcing worth to? And it's big questions, very big questions. And it's fascinating to see how they really do influence one another and flow into one another, and how like grief, for example, if someone is navigating change and grief comes up because it's a natural response to change, if there is no language or tools to process those feelings or express them, then that's where it's super common to immediately grab substance or distract with whatever other medium that might be.
That was my first loss was grief. I was 4 years old when my sister died, baby sister, 6 months old. And the household went into a complete trauma environment. And I knew what had happened, but never understood what had happened because no one had sat down and explained it to me. So I filled in probably some blanks along the way of what how I perceived it, but I do remember the day exactly. So, in those days, parents wouldn't talk to children about that. Children would be seen and not heard. They just weren't privy to adult information, even if it was going to impact them.
Yeah.
So you look at adverse childhood experiences and how many people have over a period of time, and everyone's going to have something, but it's degree, right? And sometimes you can have a chronic one-off situation, sometimes an acute, and sometimes you can have a chronic long-term situation that it even can create new personality disorders and all sorts of issues.
Yeah.
So I think that when we look at holistic healing, everything has purpose. Everything is connected in terms of a biopsychosocial model. Like there's all different realms that this stuff plays out in. And I think we just have to be more present and intentional to know what is true for us. That's all. Like we don't have to figure everything out, but just go, oh yeah, I'm feeling this, or my mood just plummeted, or I'm totally calm now, or whatever it is for that individual, because for each person it will be different. But to be aware of what is going on rather than just ignoring that all the time, which is what typically happens.
Yeah, totally. And that's actually something I spoke about in season 1. I spoke about some of the key foundations with nervous system regulation and really using like orienting and tracking sensation as a way to become more present in the environment we're in, and then more connected and present with our body. And from that awareness of just being able to, in the moment, notice, okay, do I feel safe in this environment? Do I feel safe in my body? And then allowing the gaze to go deeper, to get curious and then notice, oh, wow, I'm noticing contraction or expansion, or I'm going to take a breath. I need a hand on heart. Maybe I need to cry or laugh. Like, this is really uncomfortable, but now I notice from breathing, it's actually shifting and dissolving, and like I feel more calm. It's amazing how those tools can make such a difference, because if we don't, again, have the tools to just notice or feel safe to witness, that's when we shift to that past patterning of just like, okay, well, what is the thing that makes me feel safe, even if it isn't actually like the healthier option long term. So amazing. What trends or patterns do you see in your work as a result of unmanaged stress or unprocessed grief?
Unprocessed grief or unprocessed trauma will exhibit in every way imaginable. So this is why it's so pervasive. People don't get that. It's not just one thing or it presents one way. I feel like it's like, what do you call it? COVID. It infiltrates into every aspect of your life. It impacts you. You can't separate yourself from it. And I think that is kind of the grief that comes with it. It makes you sometimes feel marred, even though it may not be. I'm getting emotional even thinking about it because it's painful for that person. Right. It's very painful. And so it comes in anger, it can come in rage, it can come in people pleasing, it can come in overachievement, overworking, power, fame, like fear, you name it, anxiety, crippling anxiety, depression, obviously. So it just shows up, but it shows up relationally as well. And this is where it really, really hits another level, is when you get into relationships that have that trauma stored from generations or even present generation, and it gets played out in that dynamic. And it takes great work to kind of reparent that part of each partner, right? And that's the work that we've been doing. But it can be challenging. There's no question.
Yeah. Oh, I believe that. I totally believe that. Like you said, it's just amazing how interconnected all of it is. And I feel so commonly in society, addictions and mental health and trauma is so quickly judged. And
it is. It's one of the number one barriers to treatment is stigma. That says it all.
It's awful. And it's also sad because like, and I'm getting tearing up now, like, because so commonly it's judgment, and it's only thinking of it in terms of substance largely related to drinking and drugs. And
Mhm.
it then creates even more of a disconnect because it's like addictive behaviors are things that we develop as safety mechanisms from childhood onward. And like you said, it can be people pleasing, caregiving, like worrying, exercising. It's anything that like is so far on the spectrum.
Yeah, we compromise ourselves, that we've lost ourselves in the process of it, and we're not ourselves anymore, right?
It's interesting though, because it's so commonly just associated with, or like, yeah, it's so commonly associated with just one part of the addictions. And
Well,
then
yeah, because
like so much.
yeah, you're right there. That's a brilliant observation. Absolutely. We're hyper focused on the substance
Yeah,
and not really more focused or increased focus on the environment, because the environment of that individual is crucial to their development or lack of it.
100%. 100%.
And
And
that's the part that needs to really get fixed. Well, amongst, I could say there's many, but yeah.
yeah, yeah, totally. And I 100% agree with that. Like I see that as well with the client work I do, of how much environment and other relationships or influences of different relationships in our life play into the way addictions end up becoming more and more prominent. And it's amazing how some things that I look at now and I'm like, those are definitely addictive behaviors, to some degree are even celebrated in society. Like if we look at the grind culture of like the workhorse, that's an addiction to work, often because there's something to do with unworthiness beneath it from something in childhood where needs weren't met. And then we look at how it's presented now, and that's like celebrated, but then those people are often hitting extreme burnout, or then they're using substance, and that becomes more of a pattern because they don't have the coping mechanisms to actually recognize I'm super dysregulated. And that's, I think, where a lot of North American society is actually navigating the dysregulation, but it isn't necessarily spoken about because so much of it is tied to like the work ethic.
Well,
And
we value commodity over anything else. So as long as you do that, no wonder everybody's hyperactive and feels like they gotta, hustle and grind and make money.
yeah, it's wild. It's wild. So yeah, I love what you're doing.
Thank
This
you.
question might be very similar to the past, but we'll see if there's anything more to share. In your experience, what is a common misunderstanding about addiction that you'd like to share with listeners today?
Well, it's definitely not the substance, although that is a small component of it, because not everybody gets addicted to substance. So there has to be some vulnerabilities there. You know what? It's changed since when I entered recovery in 1999 and 90. In the 90s, it truly felt like a death sentence. I felt like I had a cloud on my head. There was really something wrong with me. I had a history of trauma. They gave me AA as a solution and 12-step treatment. I needed way more than that coming out of my childhood. And what I needed had really barely existed. So there was no compassionate inquiry, there was no somatic practitioners. There was like, people did a little bit of somatic work, but it was not established at all. So the only field I found Kundalini yoga. That's how I ended up in the physical body. And Kundalini was instant for me. It just like worked. It's quick. It works on a multitude of levels. It has been my go-to for the last 20 years for the most part. And that is kind of the catalyst for me going into further studies and getting really involved, because I could see nobody else was going to figure this out. And I didn't go on a mission to figure it out, but I did figure it out because I was looking for myself. And that's how I ended up founding the Recovery Concierge.
I love that. And I think that's really where so many beautiful offerings, like service-based offerings, come from. I think it really is anchored in life experience and our own trial and error as practitioners as we're integrating life experiences and maybe releasing the weight of some of what we've navigated to feel more and more whole and more expansive. And that's definitely like for me as well. The yoga piece was huge for me coming home to my body and feeling safe and in my body. Like when I look back, it's fascinating because I grew up dancing. I grew up always doing embodied activities, yet I never really felt safe in my body and I always felt at war with it. Like it never felt good enough. There was always something.
So interesting.
Yeah, like always something I was fixing and dancing and trying to control and manipulate. And then getting into yoga, it was all of a sudden like, what if you just accept who you are right now? What if you accept all of you? What if all of you is allowed to exist? And I remember just being in classes mind blown about like the philosophy side, let alone the movement. Cause I was like, hold on, that's allowed? Like, what is?
And it's working on a multitude of levels too, right?
Yeah. Yeah. And that like pulled me deeper and deeper and deeper into practice. And then from there, it expanded into all the other modalities that I now share with clients. But I just love that you had your own journey with Kundalini yoga being a big piece that led into more of the somatics and the breath and all these different modalities that you share with clients.
You know who was at my first Kundalini yoga class? Everybody will love this one. And this is one of the reasons probably why I fell in love with it. It was an event hosted by Mast and Kip back in the day. I dragged Rachel, my daughter, and we went to a yoga class thinking we were going to go for 6 o'clock. I think we came out close to midnight. It was like on a whole other level. We did keep ups for 11 minutes the first time, right? And it was probably about 100 people. And Tommy Rosen was the guy who was teaching the class. So it was just so funny, the whole thing, the way it turned out that night. But apart from that, I felt profound intoxication, which is where Naturally High comes from, my podcast. And that is really, I thought this exists. I was like as high as a kite. Absolutely. I was sold. Like I didn't need anything else, right? It was that great. So that's really how it happened for me. And I know that's not the same for everybody, but it is usually a profound experience. And it's been one of my staples in my morning practice for decades.
Yeah, I would totally echo that as well with the yoga and the breathwork component. That is a huge piece for me. And personally, like I've now been sober for a year and
beautiful.
Yeah, thank you.
Congrats.
Thank you. Yeah, it's like wild to say. And
so what do you notice? I want to ask you, may I?
Yeah, I was actually reading Glennon Doyle Untamed last night again.
It's a great book.
Love it so much.
Brilliant. Yeah.
And one thing that she was speaking about was like how when she became sober, all of a sudden she felt free. And it was just the feeling and giving herself permission to feel it all and know that like this is.
You don't have to hold it in. That's another option, right?
Yeah. And that's what for me a big learning was, is I was always stuffing it down to be cool, calm, and collected, to be the keeper of peace in my household and mediate all the things. And then it got to the point of like, hold on, I can start to feel things and it's safe and it's human to express, and like anger isn't bad and crying doesn't mean I'm weak, and actually expressing what I feel is healthy, and it's the more I do it, the better I feel. So for me, it's been like a really beautiful unfurling, like opening. And it's like
you're the truest expression of yourself. That's what's happening. When you start to claim who you are, you're not asking permission. And you know, the reason we end up here, as you think about it, they meant well, the previous generation, but they really there was also cultural expectations around the roles women, in particular, females played. So that is all part of our patriarchal conditioning and other conditioning as well. And so that has a big part to do with this, I think, for women in particular. I think they struggle with who we are supposed to think we're supposed to be versus who we really are.
Yeah. Yeah,
It's hard.
one of my favorite questions is who were you before the world told you who you should be? And I just love it so much because it really is like, whoa, like before all the conditioning comes into play and we're like influenced by every single thing, like what is it that lights us up and that we're excited to talk about and share and pursue? Like that is more a part of who we are than all these other masks that we kind of uphold. And even within the yoga traditions, it's like we have the koshas and there are those layers. And it's like when we start to remove the layers, it's that coming home to that essence, that piece of us that's always been here. And then we can actually see it and feel it and hear it that much more. So it's as you said, like for me, my experience over the last year has been an amazing coming home to self. And it's been dark and turbulent at times. It's been beautiful and spacious at times. And I'm feeling way more integrated than I've ever felt, but it's been a journey. And it's like you said at the beginning, it's required a lot of grit to keep showing up and like hold the mirror up and be like, is this working? Is this true? And
Mhm.
taking the steps. So yeah, it's an amazing,
It's
like,
about really integrating the parts of us, because there's parts that work really well and parts that don't, right? Depending on what it is we're talking about. But the unintegrated parts of us, which are our, inner child, our wounded self, that part is showing up in our adult relationships or present day relationships and sabotages the hell out of our life. So that is the work. If there's any work, like if you think about of all the work there is, I think that is the work, because then the pattern gets interrupted and it doesn't sabotage yourself.
yeah. And it's having the tools to actually process that part of us,
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
process the fear, because it's
And
there,
there's so many
they're
tools.
wanting to be seen and heard. Yeah,
There's no
totally.
limit to what you can do.
No, and that actually flows perfectly into the next question. What
Yeah.
are three of your go-to tools for reducing stress, processing grief, and navigating change?
Well, one of them you already heard, Kundalini. And the reason I like Kundalini, it captures breath work, meditation, stretching, and ultimately mind shift, right? So like it's a really go-to, but I would say now I include stretching and breath work and yoga and or something else, maybe reading, right? Like, so there's some built-in no is a boundary like zone that nobody can get to me, which is very new for me. But I find that my morning is the best time it really works, and to just try and protect that.
Yeah, love that. And are those the same things that you also share with your clients specifically as like key tools, or is there any
Um,
that?
I think it can be very personalized. So yes, I do introduce Kundalini yoga and the ancient teachings around it, because there is some learnings. But at the same time, I believe different people need different tools on different days. So we start to look at what is their emotional toolbox and what will work for them. Because for some it would be a playlist, for some it wouldn't be, right? You know what I'm saying? Even though everybody loves a playlist. But I'm just saying it would be more unique to the individual and what would work for them. And we keep adding that. There's no limit to what you can do.
Yeah. Yeah, I love that. That's what I find too, and that's what I explain with clients when I'm working in one-on-one capacities, especially where clients will ask, okay, well, what's like your specific thing? And I'm like, well, really, it's about you. Like, let's see where you're at. What are your needs? What resonates with you? Because what resonates with you this month might not next month. But if it's working now, then let's use it as a foundation. So you're building it. And then next
Mm-hmm.
start introducing a new tool and you still have this other one. So then if something happens and you're triggered, you can still access this one while you're also now gaining this new one. Because I don't want to overload them. Because often, and maybe you experience this too, is sometimes people get really excited. So they're like, oh my gosh, share everything with me. I want the whole kitchen sink. And I'm like, okay, great. I get excited. And then I'm like, actually hold the phone. We need to go one step at a time because it needs to be like titrated incremental steps for you
It's that.
to really Like,
I don't think people understand titrating and the importance of it. Like, really, it's like dip your toe in the water before you put your foot in, right? And then, or go in waist deep. It's really important because if it's too big of an experience, it can actually stop someone, prevent them from coming back.
totally. Yeah.
And so it's important to note that it is something that I don't think most people know either.
Yeah, I agree with that. And that,
Because there's too many experts, you know my feeling about experts. So we won't go there. But there's too many self-proclaimed experts, which really, some of them are great and some of them don't know how to handle. There's a very fine line between behavioral health and mental health.
yeah.
And the rules are completely, and the application can be very different in different circumstances. So knowing how to apply it can sometimes, it is actually helpful.
Yeah, 100%. The application is a huge part. Yes. Because we want clients to feel that they can win. We all love to feel that we're winning and that we're improving and really learning material versus that
Correct.
overwhelmed and then revert to past tendencies. So I think that's huge. I think another piece too, and this is something I commonly share with my clients and my community, is the reminder that like we are on an upward spiral. So
I hope so, because the world is definitely showing something very different. Like I understand collectively and spiritually and energetically, it feels like that. But the world outside today with politics and war and like just so much violence, it makes you really wonder. But I do get what you're saying. I'm sorry for interjecting like that, but that's how I feel. That there's this beauty and magnificent in a lot of ways, but it's shadowed because I'm probably an empath, but it's shadowed by these things that are really very heavy.
Yeah, well, what I was going to share was the upward spiral is like the problems we face don't ever go away. So the upward spiral is that we're constantly expanding, but we might have a problem here, and then we have a level of awareness here, and then we start to expand here, and then that problem might come back in a different way. So then we need a different tool to navigate it as our awareness expands, and then the next one. So yeah.
Beautiful analogy. Very beautiful. Yeah.
Yeah. So it's a reminder. I had a previous mentor reflect that to me when I was like, I've already been here before. What is happening? And she was like, no, look at the experience and the awareness and whatever else and recognize, okay, what are you learning and how can you like what tools to use for this one now? So it's just that reminder that for anyone listening, don't if another, what do I call them, like speed bump starts to arise in your path, don't see it as like a complete roadblock and give up and feel that your work that you've been doing doesn't matter. Like 1,000% it does. And how can you see it as a way to further grow and use the tools you have? Because that is life. So just before we sign off, do you have any final messages that you'd like to share with the listeners today? Anything related to trauma and mental health or related to tools or stress?
Absolutely. So this is a question I have not thought about, but obviously, I think you guys have to recognize that we as humans are going to fall from the path, and that's okay. It's just part of the human nature. And what matters more than anything is how fast we get back on. And so, just give yourself the permission to be kind to yourself, compassionate, give yourself some grace, and expand your physical and your mental and your spiritual bodies, and everything will be totally okay. And I say that because I've fallen, and I think I'm just human. And that's basically why I've fallen. Sometimes we're given circumstances which are challenges within themselves. And it's how fast you get back up, because that's what really counts.
I love that. Yeah. And I think it also goes back to as well, like you said at the beginning, it's really like believing in your bigger purpose and the vision you see for your life and trusting that deepest knowing that like you're here, you're on the planet for a reason. And even if life gets challenging, like you've navigated everything up to this point. So can you take another step and keep moving forward? That's really
Mhm.
cool. Well, thank you
Thank
so
you.
much for this conversation. Before we sign off, where can the listeners find you on?
You guys can find me on Instagram at the Holistic Recovery Specialist and also at the recovery underscore concierge. And yeah, message me there, and that's the easiest way to get a hold of me.
Perfect. And I'll include those social links in the notes so you can check.
Oh, come by. I have to say, come by and check out Naturally High. It's a way to have more great conversations and some teachings. And I'm hoping that you enjoy us on Spotify and all Apple and all major platforms.
So Naturally High is Jeanne's podcast. Yes.
Mhm.
So I'll include that in the notes as
Thank you.
well. Listen along. Of course. So thank you so much for this
A
conversation.
lot of fun, Edie.
Yes, yes. And as always, to everyone listening, please download, comment, like, share, send us DMs or send me an email. We love to hear from you. And I will definitely be seeing you soon. So I hope you have a beautiful day and beautiful week. Thank you again for listening. Bye.